I stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, taking a deep breath and adjusting the strand of pearls at my throat. Tonight was my son Julian's 35th birthday, and I had booked the entire ballroom, inviting all his friends and business partners. Crystal chandeliers bathed the vast hall in a light as bright as day, while waiters in tuxedos weaved through the guests with trays of champagne. A live band played soft jazz in the corner. "Mom, you look stunning tonight." Julian walked over, his Tom Ford suit perfectly tailored, looking handsome and sharp, so much like his father in his youth. He gave me a gentle hug, and I could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne. "Happy birthday, son." I patted his back and retrieved a deep blue velvet box from my clutch. "This is for you." Julian opened it, and his eyes widened at the Patek Philippe watch nestled inside. "Mom, it's too much." "Nothing is more valuable than you," I said with a smile, a warmth spreading through my chest. The watch had cost me over $500,000, but seeing his happy smile made it all worth it. My daughter-in-law, Clara, approached, navigating the room gracefully on 4-inch heels, her figure perfectly outlined by a stunning red Valentino gown. She linked her arm through mine affectionately. "Eleanor, you're absolutely glowing tonight. Julian, you should let your mother sit down. We can't have her getting tired on her feet." I allowed Clara to guide me toward the main table. At 63, my body wasn't what it used to be, and I had been feeling especially fatigued lately. But seeing my son happy, I felt it was all worthwhile. After the banquet began, I sat at the head of the table, watching with pride as Julian, surrounded by his friends, blew out the candles on his cake. The wrinkled little infant from 35 years ago had grown into an outstanding man. I had raised him all by myself. After my husband's early death, I never remarried, pouring all my energy into my son and my business. Now, my chain of luxury med spas was worth over $1 billion, and Julian was serving as the company's vice president. Everything was perfect. "Mom, you look a little pale. Are you tired?" Julian noticed my mind had drifted and asked with concern. I did feel a wave of dizziness, likely from being overworked recently. "You young people have your fun. I think I'll head home and rest." "I'll take you home," Julian said, immediately standing up. No, I waved my hand. "It's your birthday. You stay and entertain your guests. I'll just have my driver pick me up." Clara insisted on walking me to the hotel entrance. While we waited for the car, she suddenly said, "Eleanor, let's all go to that new spa resort in the Berkshires next weekend. You've been working too hard. You deserve to relax." "That sounds lovely," I replied with a genuine smile. "I'm so glad you two are so thoughtful." The car arrived, and it was only after I got in that I realized I had left my handbag in the ballroom. Inside was an important contract I needed to sign tomorrow, and my blood pressure medication. I had to go back. I told my driver to wait at the entrance and went back into the hotel. The music in the ballroom was still lively. I planned to slip in through a side door, grab my bag, and leave quietly. But as I rounded a corner in the hallway, I heard Julian and Clara's voices. They seemed to be standing near a fire exit, their voices low but still clear in the quiet corridor. "The plan is to make it look like an accidental drowning. Her $1 billion will be enough for us to live on for the rest of our lives." That was my son, Julian's, voice, so cold I barely recognized it. "Are you sure you can go through with it?" "She's your mother, for God's sake." Clara's voice was a thin whisper. "Don't be so naive. How do you think she made all that money? Business is war. Who knows how many people she stepped on to get where she is? Besides, I've had enough of her controlling my life for all these years." Suddenly, my legs lost all strength. I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. My ears were ringing, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Was this the son I had worked so hard to raise? The precious boy I had given everything for? "The spa resort next week has that beautiful indoor pool," Clara's voice continued. "We can." I couldn't listen anymore. I stumbled away, turning back down the hall. When I stepped outside, the cold wind hit my face, and I realized it was wet with tears. My driver looked at me with concern. "Mrs. Vance, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, wiping my tears, my voice surprisingly calm. "Let's go home." Sitting in the back of the car, I watched the neon lights of the city streak past the window, feeling as though my entire world had crumbled. 35 years of a mother's love had been nothing but a joke. All those gestures I thought were expressions of filial piety were hiding such a venomous plot. But soon, an emotion even stronger than grief washed over me. Rage. I, Eleanor Vance, had built a business empire from the ground up. I had weathered every storm imaginable. They wanted me to have an accidental drowning? Fine. We would see who ended up drowned in the abyss. Back at my penthouse overlooking Central Park, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights. $1 billion? They clearly had no idea that my actual assets were far greater than that. More importantly, they didn't know that Eleanor Vance was never a lamb to be led to the slaughter. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of an old friend. "Arthur," I said, my voice so calm it sounded foreign even to me. "I need you in my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. "Yes, it's urgent." Hanging up, I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, a cold smirk forming on my lips. If my son wanted to play a murder game, then his mother was going to teach him what a true master of the game looked like. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains into my bedroom. I opened my eyes, for a moment unsure if the conversation I'd overheard was a nightmare or reality. Then I saw the handbag on my vanity, the one I had failed to retrieve, and the memory came flooding back. I went through the motions of washing my face and putting on my makeup, my fingers pausing as they touched the jar of expensive face cream Julian had given me last year. He had just been promoted to vice president, and had used his first bonus to buy it for me, saying, "You've worked so hard, Mom." I had been so moved I almost cried. Now, I realized that money was just a fraction of the salary I paid him, recycled back to me. The woman in the mirror had exquisite makeup, but her eyes were as cold as ice. 63 years had left their marks on my face, but they had never broken me. Julian was only 5 when my husband died. With a child in one arm, I dealt with the debts my husband left behind with the other, starting with a single small salon and building it into a nationwide brand. "Ma'am, breakfast is ready," my housekeeper, Maria, called from outside the door. "Thank you," I answered, giving myself one last look in the mirror before straightening my back and walking out of the bedroom. Arthur Chen was already waiting in my office. He was my husband's college roommate and had been our company's legal counsel for over 20 years. He was, aside from Julian, the person I trusted most in the world. "Eleanor, you look terrible." Arthur stood up, his brow furrowed. "What happened?" I motioned for him to sit, then personally locked the office door. I took a small audio recorder from the safe and placed it on the desk. "Listen to this first." The recording was of the conversation I had overheard in the hotel corridor. Despite some background noise, the content was crystal clear. Arthur's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally settled on pure rage. This is impossible. Julian, how could he?" "I wish it were fake," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "But the truth is right there. Arthur, I need you to do a few things for me." Arthur quickly regained his professional composure as a lawyer. "Name them." "First, I want a full financial workup on Julian and Clara, especially any large expenditures or income sources over the last 6 months. Second, I want the most advanced surveillance system available installed in my home. Third, find me a reliable private investigation agency." Arthur scribbled furiously in his notebook. "I'll handle it all personally." "Eleanor, what are you planning to do?" I looked out the window. The sun was bright, glinting off the skyscraper that housed my headquarters. I had poured 10 years of my life into this building. My sweat was in every brick. "First, we gather evidence," I said, turning back to him, my voice low and firm. "And then, we let them have a taste of the price of betrayal." After Arthur left, I tried to focus on some paperwork, but my mind kept drifting. Memories of Julian's childhood flashed before my eyes. The first time he said "Mama" in his sweet, lisping voice. The way he burst into my office in elementary school, clutching a test with a perfect score. The earnest look on his face after college graduation, standing before me in his new suit, saying, "Mom, I want to join the company and help you." Was it all fake? Were 35 years of memories all just an act? My phone rang, shattering my thoughts. The screen displayed Julian. My finger hovered over the screen, for a moment unsure if I could answer. Taking a deep breath, I hit the green button. "Mom!" Julian's voice was as warm as ever. "You left in such a hurry last night. Clara and I had a little surprise for you that we didn't get to share." "Oh? What surprise?" I forced my voice to sound normal. "Clara's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." I felt like I had been struck by lightning. The pen in my hand clattered to the floor. Pregnant? At a time like this? Was it a coincidence? Or part of their plan? "Mom? Are you there?" "I'm here." I managed to squeeze the words out from between my teeth. That's wonderful news. We wanted to come over for dinner tonight to tell you in person. Is that okay?" "Of course," I said. "I'll have Maria prepare your favorite dishes." I hung up the phone and slumped into my chair, my hands shaking uncontrollably. What were they planning? To soften me up with the news of a grandchild? Or was this just another lie? At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Arthur returned with the preliminary findings. He handed me a folder, his expression grim. "The situation is worse than we thought." I opened the folder. The first page was Julian's bank statements. For the past 6 months, there had been massive monthly wire transfers, totaling over $7 million. The recipient was an offshore gambling website. "He's hooked on online gambling," Arthur explained, pointing to several transactions. "He's at least $7 million in the hole to some very dangerous loan sharks. These payments are just covering the interest." The second page was the file on Clara, my daughter-in-law. On the surface, a graceful and virtuous socialite, was secretly involved with 3 other men: her golf pro, a wealthy client who frequented my spas, and one of Julian's own college friends. "And this," Arthur said, handing me a few photographs. "They went to this hotel after the party last night." The photos showed Julian and Clara in a hotel cafe, speaking with a strange man, their expressions serious. The last photo showed Julian handing the man a thick envelope. "Who is this man?" "Vince Keller, a former merchant marine, now runs a scuba diving shop." Arthur pushed his glasses up. "Interestingly, he just took out a massive life insurance policy last week. The beneficiary is his girlfriend." My blood ran cold. They had already found the man to execute their accident. "What about the surveillance equipment?" "It will be installed by tomorrow. Top-of-the-line models, with audio capture and cloud storage." Arthur hesitated. "Eleanor, this is getting dangerous. Have you considered going to the police?" I shook my head. "We don't have enough evidence yet. Besides, I stroked the photo of Julian in the file. I want to give him one last chance." The words sounded absurd even to me. Give him a chance? Had he given me one? But deep down, a small part of me, the young mother who once held that baby boy, clung to a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was all a terrible misunderstanding. That evening, Julian and Clara arrived as promised. Clara immediately linked her arm through mine. "Mom, we have wonderful news to tell you." She wore a loose-fitting dress, her face beaming with happiness. If I didn't know the truth, I would have been completely moved by her performance. At the dinner table, Julian spoke at length about their long-held plans to have a baby, while Clara demurely lowered her head and smiled. I forced myself to act surprised and overjoyed, even presenting them with a gold baby locket I had prepared long ago as a gift. "Oh, Mom, you're too thoughtful," Clara said, taking the locket, a glint in her eye that I couldn't decipher. "Julian and I were talking, and we were thinking, after the baby is born, we'd like you to come live with us. We worry about you being all alone in this big house." What a wonderfully filial suggestion. I almost wanted to applaud. "Of course," I said with a smile. "I'd love to help with the baby." After dinner, I brought it up casually. "By the way, the company is organizing a yachting event next weekend. You two should come. We can celebrate me becoming a grandmother." Julian and Clara exchanged a subtle glance. "Of course, that sounds great." Julian's response was a little too quick. "It's been a while since I've been out on the water," Clara added. "Mom, how is your blood pressure lately? Will it be okay on the boat?" "I'll be fine. I'll feel perfectly safe with you two by my side," I said, patting her hand, thinking what a convincing performance this was. After they left, I immediately called Arthur. I need you to check Vince Keller's diving certifications and make sure the life-saving equipment on that yacht is the best money can buy. After hanging up, I stood on the balcony, gazing at the night sky. The stars were bright, just like they were on the night Julian, then 5 years old, and I counted them in the backyard of our old family home upstate. That night, he had asked me, "Mommy, will you love me forever?" How did I reply? "Oh, right," I said. "Until the stars stop shining and the oceans stop flowing." How ironic. The stars were still shining, the oceans were still flowing, but my son's love had already rotted away. The next day, the surveillance system was installed. The technician showed me how to use my phone to monitor every corner of my home at any time, including listening to audio and replaying recordings. "This hidden camera is in the picture frame in the living room. This one is in the dining room chandelier, and the one in the bedroom is in," he pointed. I nodded, paying him the extra fee for the rush job. After he left, I sat alone in front of the monitor, looking at the empty living room, and was suddenly struck by an indescribable sadness. This was my home, the place I once considered the safest in the world. Now, I was installing surveillance equipment to spy on the person I loved most. In the afternoon, I had tea with a few old clients from the spa, and I deliberately let it slip that I had recently amended my will. "When you get to my age, you have to start thinking about these things," I said, sipping my tea, my voice just loud enough for the woman at the next table, an acquaintance of Clara's, to overhear. "I plan to leave the majority of my estate to Julian and his future children. After all, blood is thicker than water. The news would reach Clara soon enough. If they were after my money, this bait should keep them from making any rash moves for now." That evening, I got a call from Julian. "Mom, I heard you changed your will." I feigned surprise. "Oh? Who told you? I was trying to figure out how to bring it up with you." "Mom," his voice suddenly choked up, "please don't think about such morbid things. You're going to live a long, long life." If I hadn't heard that recording, I would have been completely fooled by his acting. "Silly boy, life and death are natural," I said softly. "A mother just wants to leave the best for her son and grandchild." After we hung up, the monitor showed Julian immediately calling Clara. They excitedly discussed the good news. I turned off the screen, a wave of nausea washing over me. On the third day, Arthur brought more information. Vince Keller was indeed a certified diving instructor, and more alarmingly, was Clara's high school classmate. Even more disturbing, he had recently purchased a large amount of professional diving equipment, including specialized weight belts. "These are murder tools," Arthur said, his face pale. "Eleanor, you have to cancel the yacht trip." "No." I shook my head. "On the contrary, we're proceeding as planned." "Are you insane? It's too dangerous." I looked at him calmly. "It's only when they make their move that we can get concrete evidence. Besides, I handed him a document. I'm fully prepared." Arthur read the document, his eyes widening in shock. "When did you?" "Yesterday," I smiled faintly. "Now, let's see just how ruthless my dear son and daughter-in-law can be." The day of the yacht trip arrived quickly. I stood on the dock at a private marina on Long Island Sound, looking at the 100-foot luxury yacht, the Neptune. The sun reflected blindingly off its white hull. I had purchased it just last month, ostensibly as a recreational vessel for company executives, but in reality, it was for today's test. "Mom?" Julian's voice came from behind. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and white shorts, looking healthy and vibrant, not at all like a man drowning in gambling debt. Clara was on his arm in a flowing bohemian maxi dress and a wide-brimmed straw hat, her abdomen showing no sign of pregnancy. "You're just in time," I said, greeting them with a smile. "The boat is ready." Arthur stood a short distance away, pretending to be another guest. He gave me a slight nod, signaling that everything was in place. Aboard the yacht, besides the three of us, were 6 crew members and 2 servers, all reliable people handpicked by Arthur. Once we were on board, I gave Julian and Clara a tour. They acted incredibly excited, especially about the luxurious indoor pool on the lower deck. "Mom, this pool is amazing," Julian said, running his fingers along the edge. "It must be at least 8 feet deep." 8.5 feet, I corrected. noticing Clara's gaze linger for a few seconds on the life preservers and the emergency call button by the pool. "What? Are you thinking of going for a swim?" "Oh no, not at all," Julian said, flustered. "I just think it's a great design." Clara quickly interjected. "Julian is just worried about your blood pressure. The sea can be choppy, and he's afraid you might feel unwell." "I brought my medication. I'll be fine," I said, patting her hand. "Today is all about relaxing." After the yacht left the harbor, I invited them to the deck for brunch. The sea breeze was gentle, the sun was warm, and the atmosphere seemed perfectly pleasant. I deliberately had a few glasses of champagne, feigning a slight buzz. "Mom, maybe you should slow down," Julian advised, though his eyes darted toward Clara. "Why?" "I'm just so happy," I said, waving my hand. "Thinking about my future grandchild just makes me want to celebrate." After lunch, I suggested we relax by the pool. The pool was located inside the yacht, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass windows with a view of the ocean. I pretended to be even more intoxicated, stumbling slightly as I walked. "Mom, be careful," Julian said, steadying me. His palm was slick with sweat. "It's nothing. I'm just going to the restroom," I said, deliberately staggering in that direction. But I actually took a detour, hiding around a corner to watch them. Once I was sure they couldn't see me, I quickly contacted Arthur through my earpiece. "Get ready." Then I returned to the poolside and pretended to accidentally drop my phone into the pool. "Oh, no," I cried out, bending over as if to retrieve it, and then deliberately lost my balance, falling into the water with a loud splash. The cold water instantly enveloped me. I held my breath and opened my eyes underwater, seeing the distorted figures of Julian and Clara standing by the edge of the pool. A flicker of hesitation crossed Julian's face. He reached for a life preserver, but Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him back. She shook her head at him, her lips moving. From the shape of her mouth, I could see she was saying, "Wait." My heart sank to the bottom of the pool. Even though I was prepared for this, seeing it with my own eyes was like a knife to the heart. My own son could actually stand by and watch me die. I held on underwater, my lungs beginning to burn. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, one of the men Arthur had hired dove in and pulled me out. "Mrs. Vance, are you okay?" a crewman asked nervously, as others rushed over. I coughed violently, weakly waving my hand. I'm fine. I just slipped." Only then did Julian rush over. "Mom, you scared me to death." His expression shifted instantly from shock to deep concern. "How are you? Should we call a doctor?" Clara also leaned in, her face a mask of perfect worry. "Mom, you look so pale. Let me help you back to your room to rest." I watched their faces carefully. I saw a fleeting look of disappointment in Julian's eyes, and the corner of Clara's mouth drooped slightly as she turned away. They were frustrated that their plan had failed. "No need," I said weakly. "I just want to go to my cabin and change." Back in the master stateroom, I locked the door and immediately contacted Arthur. "Did you get all of it on tape?" Clear as day, Arthur's voice came through the earpiece. "Including the footage of Clara stopping Julian from saving you. Also, we've confirmed that Vince Keller is in the area. He rented a small boat and has been tailing us." I let out a cold laugh. Just as I thought. After changing, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back had eyes of ice, all hesitation gone. On the return journey, I pretended to be exhausted and went to my room to rest early. In reality, I was watching Julian and Clara's every move through the hidden cameras. They were hiding in their guest room, their voices hushed, but the surveillance equipment captured every word. "You almost ruined everything," Clara scolded. "Why did you reach for the life preserver?" "She's my mother." Julian's voice trembled. I wasn't ready." "Not ready?" Clara sneered. "Are you ready to pay back that $7 million debt? Are you ready for our child to be born in a slum? We can find another way." "There is no other way," Clara cut him off. "Vince has already taken the down payment. We have to succeed next time. Your mother said today she amended her will to leave us the bulk of her fortune. This is our best chance." After a long silence, Julian whispered, next time, I won't hesitate." Hearing that, I turned off the monitor. It was enough. More than enough. I stood at the window, watching the ocean recede into the distance, my heart a dead weight in my chest. The little boy who used to cuddle in my arms was gone. In his place was a stranger, ruled by greed and weakness. When we docked, I hugged Julian and Clara. I had a wonderful time today. Thank you for taking such good care of me. Mom, are you sure you're okay? Julian asked, his eyes shifting nervously. Perfectly fine, I smiled. By the way, I was thinking of going to that spa resort next month. Why don't you two join me? Clara's eyes lit up. Of course. A nice soak in the hot springs would be great for the baby. Perfect prey, walking right into the trap. I smiled as I bid them farewell. But the moment I was in my car, my expression turned to stone. To the office, I told the driver. And get Arthur Chen on the phone. It's time to launch the counterattack. Chapter 4. Weaving the Net. From the floor to ceiling windows of my office, the city lights twinkled like a fallen galaxy. I stood there, a glass of whiskey in my hand, the burn of the alcohol keeping me sharp. Arthur sat at my desk, surrounded by files. Based on today's video and audio recordings, we can definitely establish attempted murder, Arthur said, pushing up his glasses. But if you want to completely destroy them, we'll need more. I turned around. Like motive, planning details, financial trails. Arthur opened a folder. I found a significant number of call logs between Clara and Vince Keller. And after every call, Clara meticulously deletes the records. Interesting, I said, taking a sip of whiskey. Keep digging, especially into their financial transactions. Also, I want to know if the baby Clara is carrying is actually Julian's. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You suspect? I suspect everything, I said, putting down my glass. Now, let's talk about the plan for the spa resort. Over the next 2 weeks, I maintained a facade of normal life, all while carefully weaving a massive net. I deliberately acted more and more dependent on Julian, frequently calling him to my office for business advice and signing several documents in his favor in his presence. Mom, you seem to put a lot of trust in me lately. Julian couldn't help but ask one day. I patted his hand. I'm getting older. I have to plan for the future. You're my son. Who else would I trust? My words seemed to strike a chord within him. A flash of guilt crossed his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Greed, it seemed, had ultimately triumphed over conscience. Meanwhile, Arthur's investigation made a breakthrough. Clara was indeed pregnant, but according to her medical records and the gestational age, the time of conception was during a 2-week period when Julian was on a business trip to the United States. Even more shocking, her relationship with Vince Keller was far closer than we'd imagined. They had been lovers in the past and had stayed in touch after breaking up. This is someone Clara met with yesterday, Arthur said, handing me a few photos. Cody, a personal trainer, also one of her lovers. In the photos, Clara was talking intimately with a muscular young man in a cafe, even sharing a passionate kiss. Brilliant, I sneered. A triple agent. It gets better, Arthur said, opening his laptop. We bugged Clara's phone. Yesterday, she told Cody that once she gets the inheritance, she and Vince are going to leave the country together. I shook my head. Poor Julian, betrayed by everyone. But as I said it, I felt no sympathy. He chose this path. He had to face the consequences. To accelerate their plan, I decided to add more fuel to the fire. During a weekend family dinner, I intentionally brought it up at the table. Julian, I've been feeling some heart palpitations lately. I'm thinking of getting a full checkup. Clara's chopsticks paused midair. She quickly asked with concern, Mom, where are you not feeling well? Do you want me to go with you? No need, it's just old age, I sighed. By the way, I'm thinking of formally drawing up a will to hand over the company to you to manage, Julian. After all, there's a grandchild to raise. Julian's spoon clattered into his bowl. Mom, don't say that. It's the natural course of things, I smiled. I've already asked Arthur to prepare the documents. We'll sign them next week. The surveillance footage from that night showed Julian and Clara having a fierce argument after they got home. We can't wait any longer, Clara shrieked. What if she finds something during her checkup and changes the will? But Julian's voice was full of hesitation. No buts. Clara interrupted him. The spa resort is the perfect opportunity. It's secluded, has minimal security, and she has high blood pressure. An accidental drowning while in a hot spring is perfectly normal. After a long silence, Julian whispered, "All right, we'll proceed as planned." Hearing this, I turned off the monitor. The prey had fallen completely into the trap. It was time to close the net. The next day, I met with the general manager of the spa resort. He was an old friend of mine and was fully cooperative with my plan. "Eleanor, are you sure about this?" he asked, concerned. "Absolutely," I said, handing him a flash drive. "This is a list of the surveillance equipment I need installed. The most discreet models you have." After leaving the resort, I went to the hospital, ostensibly for a checkup, but my real purpose was to obtain a sample of Julian's blood. He had his annual physicals there, and his blood samples were stored in the hospital's biobank. "Director Miller, I need a DNA test done," I told my old classmate at the hospital. Completely confidential. Though puzzled, he agreed to my request. I provided my own blood sample and retrieved Julian's archived one. "The results will be ready in 3 days," he said. 3 days later, I sat in my office with the DNA report in front of me. Before I opened the envelope, my hand trembled slightly. Whatever the result, it would change everything. The conclusion on the report hit me like a physical blow. The genetic markers between the samples do not conform to Mendelian inheritance patterns. A biological mother-child relationship is excluded. I stared at the words, my mind a complete blank. Julian was not my biological son. How was this possible? I had carried him for 10 months and endured 12 hours of labor to give birth to him. How could he not be mine? My mind flashed back 35 years to that night in the hospital. My husband was with me. I was in excruciating pain, and then, after giving birth, I fell into a coma for 2 days due to massive blood loss. When I woke up, a nurse placed a wrinkled baby boy in my arms and told me, "This is your son." Was there a mix-up? Or a more horrifying thought surfaced. Was Julian my husband's child with another woman? Did my husband bring his illegitimate son home and lie to me, telling me he was mine? Shaking, I called Arthur. "I need you to investigate every social relationship my husband had before he died, especially any female friends. If Julian wasn't my son, then my 35 years of devotion, all my love and sacrifice, were built on a lie, and my revenge would become something entirely different." Chapter 5. The Bloodline Mystery. The hospital archives smelled of disinfectant and old paper. I sat in a corner, poring over my own obstetric records from 35 years ago. Director Miller had granted me special access to these confidential files. "Mrs. Vance, are you certain you want to do this?" he asked worriedly. "I have to know the truth." My finger stopped on a particular page. "What's this?" "Neonatal hemolytic disease, emergency blood transfusion." Director Miller leaned over. "Ah, that's your son's treatment record after birth. He had hemolysis due to Rh incompatibility, so we had to perform a transfusion." I frowned. "H incompatibility? I'm H positive, and so was my husband. How could our child?" Director Miller's expression turned strange. "Are you certain your husband was H positive?" "Of course, his medical report." I stopped, realizing I had never actually seen my husband Richard's medical reports. I had only taken his word for it. Director Miller said carefully, "Hemolytic disease can occur when an H-negative mother carries an H-positive fetus. If both parents are Rh positive, this condition is impossible." My world spun on its axis again. This meant either my husband was Rh negative, or this child wasn't his. "Can you trace the source of the blood used for my son's transfusion?" "Records from that era are incomplete," Director Miller said, flipping through the file. "Wait, here's a handwritten note. It says, 'Blood provided by father.' So, Julian was indeed my husband's son, but not necessarily mine. Then where was my biological son? Or was I incapable of having children at all?" I left the hospital and went straight to Arthur's office. He was sorting through my late husband, Richard Vance's, old files. "Find anything?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Arthur looked grave. "Your husband did have a long-term girlfriend before you were married. Her name was Evelyn. They broke up due to family opposition, but according to her old neighbors, they remained in contact during your marriage. The name Evelyn sounded vaguely familiar. What happened to her? She died in childbirth, just 3 months before you gave birth, Arthur said, handing me a yellowed newspaper clipping. She delivered a baby boy, but the child's whereabouts are unknown. I stared at the blurry photo in the paper as a terrible hypothesis formed in my mind. My husband had a child with his first love. The lover died in childbirth, and he somehow passed the baby off as ours, while I, in a postpartum coma for 2 days, knew nothing. Find that child's birth records, I said, my voice frighteningly calm, and I need to know if I was ever truly pregnant. The investigation that followed was like peeling an onion. Each layer brought fresh tears. My own medical records showed that I had indeed been pregnant, but the delivery notes were suspiciously vague. Evelyn's child was supposedly sent to an orphanage, but the orphanage had no record of him. The key piece of evidence came from the memory of a retired nurse. After an exhaustive search, Arthur located a nurse who had worked in the maternity ward back then, now in her 80s. Richard Vance's son, the old nurse recalled over the phone. "Oh, I remember that baby. He had severe Rh disease. His father insisted on using his own blood for the transfusion and gave our department a large sum of money. Was that child his biological son?" I asked directly. There was a long silence on the other end. "Who are you to him?" "I am his wife. Or rather, I thought I was that child's mother." Another silence, then a sigh. Mr. Vance told us at the time that the baby his wife delivered was stillborn. He didn't want his wife to suffer the trauma, so he brought in a baby from somewhere else. I hung up the phone, feeling as if all the strength had been drained from my body. A 35-year lie. My life, my motherly love, all built on one man's deception. Arthur watched me with concern. "Eleanor, are you okay?" "Surprisingly, yes," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "You know, in a way, this is liberating. If Julian isn't my son, then his betrayal doesn't hurt quite as much. So what will you do? Are you still going through with the revenge plan?" "Of course," I said, turning around, my eyes flashing with a cold light, "and it will be even more thorough. He may not be my son, but he and Clara still tried to murder me. Legally and morally, they must pay the price." Back home, I reevaluated the entire plan. The trap at the spa resort was set, but now I needed more. If Julian was not my son, he had no right to inherit any of my property. But first, I needed irrefutable DNA evidence. The next day, I invited Julian over for dinner. When he went to the restroom, I collected a saliva sample from the water glass he had used. After he left, I immediately sent the sample to the lab for comparison with my DNA. 3 days later, the results confirmed what I already knew. Julian and I shared no biological connection. Meanwhile, Arthur had located Evelyn's grave. I stood before the headstone of this woman. I had never met, my heart a tangle of emotions. She had loved the wrong man and paid with her life, while I had been robbed of 35 years of motherhood. "You know," I whispered to the headstone, "your son grew up to be a greedy coward. Perhaps it's just in Richard Vance's genes." Back in the car, I made my decision. "Arthur, change my will. All of my assets will go into a charitable foundation. Julian gets nothing, not a single penny. And the revenge plan? It proceeds as scheduled," I said, looking out the window. The spa resort in the Berkshires would be where their nightmare began. The reservation confirmation for the spa resort lay on my desk. In 3 days, we would depart for that picturesque, yet murderous place. I picked up the phone and called Arthur. "Is everything arranged?" "All set." Arthur's voice was cautious. "Surveillance is in place, including the spa area and their suite. Also, Vince Keller scouted the resort yesterday." I sneered. Impatient, aren't they? I hung up and pulled up the resort's floor plan on my computer. It was a Japanese-style spa hotel, with each suite boasting a private open-air hot spring pool perfectly secluded for their so-called accident. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. My secretary walked in. "Mrs. Vance, a Helen is here to see you. She says it's about your late husband." I frowned. "Helen?" She said she was a former colleague of your husband's at the university. My intuition told me this was important. "Send her in." An elegant woman in her 60s entered, a look of unease on her face. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Helen. I used to work with Richard Vance. I invited her to sit and poured her some tea. How can I help you?" Helen took a yellowed envelope from her purse. "I found this while going through some old things. I felt you should have it." She hesitated. "Evelyn and I were close friends. Before she died, she entrusted this letter to me, saying that if Richard Vance's wife ever came looking, I should give it to her." My fingers trembled slightly. "Evelyn, my husband's first love, Julian's biological mother. Why bring it to me now? Honestly, I had completely forgotten about it," Helen sighed. "It wasn't until I heard about you and your son, Julian, at a class reunion last week that I remembered." "Thank you," I said, taking the envelope. After Helen left, I locked my office door and carefully opened it. Inside were several faded sheets of paper, the handwriting elegant but weak. "To the sister I have never met, by the time you read this, I will be gone. It is a cruel irony that our lives were intertwined by one man, yet we never met." The letter's contents were like a sharp knife, slowly dissecting the truth of 35 years ago. Evelyn had indeed maintained a relationship with my husband, even during my pregnancy, but the twist was that she never knew Richard was married. It was only when she became pregnant and told him that he confessed he had a wife. "He said he would divorce you and marry me, but I could see his hesitation. I didn't want to destroy your family, so I decided to raise the child alone. But fate had other plans. The doctors told me that due to a rare condition, childbirth would be extremely risky for me." Then came the most shocking part. Evelyn wrote, "Richard once proposed that if I had a boy and his wife had a girl, we could switch the babies. I refused his insane plan, but I knew his obsession. He needed a son to carry on the Vance name. Please, be careful of this man. And please, be kind to my child if he manages to survive." The letter slipped from my hand. So Richard might have swapped the babies. Then where was my biological child? Dead or alive? I immediately called Arthur and told him the contents of the letter. "Does this change anything?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "No, the revenge plan continues. But I need to know if my child is still alive." In the next 3 days, Arthur mobilized all his resources. The result was heartbreaking. I had indeed given birth to a boy, but he had died shortly after birth. To spare me the pain of losing a child, and to satisfy his own obsession with having a son, Richard had passed Evelyn's child off as ours. Evelyn's baby was also diagnosed as unlikely to survive past a month, Arthur explained. But he miraculously recovered. Richard bribed the hospital staff and completed the switch. I hung up and stood on the balcony, letting the night wind dry the tears on my face. 35 years ago, a selfish man wove a lie that made me pour all my motherly love onto a child with whom I shared no blood. And now, that child wanted to kill me. The fire of revenge burned purer and hotter in my heart. Julian was not my son. He was just an ungrateful viper I had nursed at my breast. On the night before we left for the resort, the surveillance feed showed Julian and Clara plotting in their home. "Vince is ready," Clara said excitedly. "He'll pose as a masseur to get into the resort tomorrow. When your mother is in the hot spring, he'll create the accident." Julian's voice was hesitant. "What if it fails?" "It won't fail," Clara said, her tone sharp. "And even if it does, there's no evidence linking it to us. Remember, she's not your real mother. There's no need to be sentimental." That sentence pierced my heart like a shard of ice. They knew. They already knew. When? I immediately rewound the previous surveillance footage and found the answer in a clip from a week ago. Clara had been rummaging through Julian's old belongings and found a hidden document, a letter from Richard, confessing Julian's true parentage. So that was why she had suddenly accelerated the murder plot. I sneered. Knowing he wasn't my biological son had removed their last psychological barrier. The next morning, Julian and Clara drove to pick me up. Clara wore a loose dress, her stomach still flat, showing no signs of a 5-month pregnancy. "Mom, you look wonderful," she said, linking her arm through mine, her acting skills truly top-notch. "I slept well," I replied with a smile, my gaze shifting to Julian. He had dark circles under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept at all. During the 3-hour drive, we made small talk, each of us hiding our own dark thoughts. I noticed Clara checking her phone frequently, while Julian was unusually silent. The resort was nestled in the mountains, serene and sparsely populated. We were checked into the most luxurious courtyard suite, where each room had its own private hot spring pool. "Mom, you get some rest. We'll come get you for dinner," Clara said sweetly. Once the door was closed, I immediately checked the room. Arthur's people had already installed micro cameras everywhere, even an underwater camera at the bottom of the hot spring pool. I found a small communicator behind the nightstand, put in the micro earpiece, and immediately heard Arthur's voice. "Everything is normal. Vince Keller has checked in as a masseur. He's in the West Wing, room 203. I responded softly, "Keep them under surveillance." At dinner, Julian was obviously distracted, dropping food on the table several times. Clara, however, was unusually animated, constantly encouraging me to drink. "Mom, the steak here is famous. You have to try it." I pretended not to notice that she barely touched her own glass and accepted graciously, showing signs of intoxication after just 2 small cups. "I'm a little dizzy. I think I'll head back and rest." "I'll walk you," Julian said, standing up. Back in the suite, I changed into a robe and said loudly, "A soak in the hot spring should help. Do you need me to stay with you?" Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly. No. You young people go have fun," I said with a wave of my hand. "And remember, we have a photographer scheduled for a family portrait tomorrow morning." This was a deliberate prompt. If they didn't act tonight, they might not get another chance after the photo shoot. After closing the door, I immediately contacted Arthur through the communicator. "Did they take the bait?" "Clara just contacted Vince. They're planning to make their move in an hour. The police are in position and ready to move in." I walked to the edge of the hot spring pool. The water was the perfect temperature, steam rising from its surface. The pool was small but deep, with towels and robes neatly placed at the edge, looking completely harmless. But I knew it was about to become Julian and Clara's judgment chamber. I deliberately left my slippers by the pool and hung my robe in a conspicuous spot. Then, I hid behind a secret door in the room, a passage leading to the adjacent suite, an escape route specially arranged by Arthur. Less than half an hour later, I heard the faint sound of a door opening. Through the hidden camera, I saw Vince Keller sneak in, wearing a mask and a staff uniform. He looked around, confirmed that I was in the hot spring. It was actually a mannequin I had placed there, and then crept towards the pool. Just then, the door was thrown open, and Julian rushed in. "Stop." Vince jumped in surprise. "Mr. Vance, I thought you said I changed my mind," Julian yelled. "Get out!" Clara then burst in, her face livid. "Julian, are you insane?" "I can't do this," Julian said, turning to his wife. "Even if she's not my biological mother, she raised me for 35 years. Clara sneered. "A little late for a conscience, don't you think?" She gave Vince a look. "Continue." Vince hesitated, then reached out to push the mannequin into the pool. At that moment, Julian lunged at him, and the two began to fight. Clara screamed and tried to help, but she slipped on a puddle of water on the floor and fell hard. "Ah, my stomach!" she cried out, curling up in pain as blood began to seep through her dress. The scene was chaos. I pressed the button on my communicator. Now. Instantly, police sirens blared throughout the resort. Officers burst through the door and arrested Vince Keller on the spot. Clara was rushed to the hospital, while Julian sat on the floor in a daze, his face ashen. I stepped out from behind the secret door and stood before him. "Happy birthday, son." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with shock and shame. "Mom, you knew." "Everything," I said coldly, "including the fact that you are not my son." As the officers handcuffed him, he didn't resist. He just asked in a low voice, "Do you hate me?" I was silent for a moment. "I hate the lies Richard Vance created. You are just the monster that was born from those lies." Watching him being led away to a police car, I thought I would feel triumphant, but all I felt was a vast emptiness. 35 years of our lives, ending like this. Arthur came over. Clara had a miscarriage. The doctors said there was no way the baby could have been Julian's. As expected, I sighed. The evidence is all secured? Airtight? Rock solid, Arthur confirmed. The surveillance footage, the audio recordings, Vince Keller's full confession, they'll be prosecuted for attempted murder. I nodded, looking at the distant mountains. My revenge was complete. But why did my heart still feel so heavy? Chapter 7. The Prelude to Judgment. 3 days after the arrests, I was in Arthur's office reviewing the case files. The desk was piled high with documents, photos, and transcripts. Every piece was irrefutable proof of their crimes. Vince Keller confessed to everything, Arthur said, pushing up his glasses, including the $50,000 down payment from Clara and the promise of another $200,000 upon completion. I flipped through the confession. How much did he say Julian was involved? According to him, Julian was in on it from the beginning, but wavered at the last minute. Arthur handed me another file. Interestingly, we found this on Clara's computer. It was an electronic insurance policy. Clara had taken out a massive life insurance policy on Julian, with herself as the sole beneficiary. The policy was dated shortly after their wedding. She was planning this from the start, I sneered. Kill me for the inheritance, then get rid of Julian to have it all for herself. It gets better, Arthur said, opening his laptop. When Clara miscarried at the hospital, we obtained a DNA sample from the fetus. It's confirmed not to be Julian's. I shook my head. Poor Julian, betrayed by everyone. But even as I said it, I felt no pity. He chose this path. He had to face the consequences. The question now, Arthur said, closing his laptop, is how far you want to take this. The evidence is enough to put them away for more than 10 years, but considering Julian's last-minute hesitation, the law will decide their fate, I interrupted. I will not interfere. Arthur nodded and changed the subject. The media has already caught wind of the story. Do you want to hold a press conference? No, I said after a moment's thought, but you can leak some details to a reliable journalist. Emphasize the fact that they knew I wasn't Julian's biological mother. Understood. Arthur made a note. By the way, Julian has requested to see you. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the traffic below. Once upon a time, a little boy would run into this office, excitedly telling me about his day at school. Now, he was a prisoner, wanting to see me one last time. Arrange it for tomorrow. The next morning, I saw Julian at the detention center. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. He was a shadow of his former self. Mom, he said, picking up the phone through the glass, his voice choking. I didn't correct his term of address, waiting for him to continue. I'm so sorry, he lowered his head. I know it's too late to say anything, but please believe me, I regretted it at the end. I cut him off coldly. Was that because you found out Clara betrayed you? Because her baby wasn't yours? Or was it because your murder plot failed? His face turned pale. You know, I know everything. I leaned forward. I know you have a $7 million gambling debt. I know about Clara's relationship with Vince Keller, and I know that as soon as you found out I wasn't your real mother, you decided to kill me without a second thought. It wasn't like that. He shook his head frantically. At first, I did. But later. Later, your conscience kicked in? I sneered. It was too late, Julian. For 35 years, I loved you as my own son. And this is how you repaid me. Blood doesn't matter. What matters are the choices you made. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he leaned forward and asked, Who was my biological mother? Evelyn, your father's first love, I answered curtly. She died in childbirth, and your father swapped you for my baby, because the boy I gave birth to was stillborn. The truth hit him like a hammer. Julian's shoulders slumped, and tears rolled silently down his face. So, I never belonged in this family. You did, my voice softened slightly, until you chose to betray it. Leaving the detention center, a light rain began to fall. I didn't use an umbrella, letting the cool drops mix with the tears on my face. This nightmare that had lasted for months was finally ending. But why did my heart still ache so much? In the following days, I buried myself in company affairs and case follow-ups. The media went into a frenzy over the story of the tycoon mother and her treacherous son, and public opinion was almost unanimously on my side. I gave 2 interviews, carefully emphasizing how I had raised Julian single-handedly and my heartbreak upon discovering he was not my biological son. "Do you still love him?" a female journalist asked delicately. I paused for a moment. "I love the little boy who used to hug me, not the stranger who tried to kill me." As the case proceeded, more shocking details emerged. Clara was not only having affairs, but was also involved in illegal fundraising schemes. Julian, aside from his gambling, had embezzled company funds to cover his debts. Their public images were shattered, while mine soared the strong, resilient businesswoman betrayed by her closest kin. But at night, I would often wake up from nightmares, dreaming of a 5-year-old Julian standing by my bed, asking, "Mommy, why don't you want me anymore?" I would wake up in a cold sweat, needing sleeping pills to fall back asleep. A month later, Arthur brought news. Julian's psychiatric evaluation shows he's suffering from severe depression. His lawyer might use it to argue for a reduced sentence. "To be expected," I said, looking at the report. "What about Clara? She's trying to pin all the blame on Julian, claiming she was forced to cooperate." Arthur sneered. "But Vince's testimony and those insurance policies make it hard for her to wriggle out." I nodded. "Has the trial date been set?" "The 15th of next month." Arthur hesitated. "Eleanor, are you sure you want to testify? It will be incredibly difficult for you." "I have to," I said firmly. "Not just for justice, but for closure." After Arthur left, I stood on the balcony, looking out at the city's myriad lights. The satisfaction of revenge had long since faded, leaving only a profound emptiness. I began to wonder, after all of this is over, what will I do? Where will I go? Chapter 8. The Final Judgment. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was swarmed with reporters and onlookers. I wore a simple, elegant navy blue suit and entered the building flanked by Arthur and my bodyguards. Camera flashes went off incessantly, and reporters shouted questions, but I remained silent. Julian and Clara were brought into the courtroom separately. Julian was much thinner, his eyes vacant. He flinched when he saw me. Clara, on the other hand, was still impeccably dressed, her eyes defiant. Once the trial began, the prosecutor laid out the case in meticulous detail, presenting a mountain of evidence. The surveillance footage from the resort, Vince Keller's confession, the audio recordings of Clara and Julian planning the murder, the receipts for the diving equipment. Each piece of evidence was a hammer blow, sealing their guilt. When the prosecutor played the video from the yacht, showing Clara stopping Julian from saving me after I fell into the water, a wave of gasps went through the courtroom. The jurors looked shocked and disgusted. When it was the defense's turn, Julian's lawyer emphasized his last-minute remorse and his actions to prevent the crime, pleading for leniency. Clara's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, manipulated by her husband, even insinuating that Julian was abusive and had forced her to cooperate. "Nonsense," I whispered to Arthur. "The recordings show she was the mastermind." Arthur patted my hand. "Patience, our turn is coming." When the judge called me to the witness stand, the courtroom fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. I took the stand, was sworn in, and calmly recounted the discovery that Julian was not my biological son and the full details of their murder plot. "Mrs. Vance," the prosecutor asked, "do you believe the defendant Julian Vance's act of stopping Vince Keller at the last moment represents genuine remorse?" I looked at Julian. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders trembling. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Perhaps it was a momentary pang of conscience. Perhaps he truly regretted it. But regardless, he did participate in the initial planning of my murder. "Do you hate him?" the prosecutor asked softly. The question hung in the silent courtroom. I took a deep breath. I did. But now, I just feel a profound sadness. For a 35-year relationship between a mother and son to end this way is a tragedy beyond comprehension. Julian suddenly looked up, his eyes filled with tears. Our gazes met, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy he once was. Clara's lawyer tried to attack my testimony, implying that I was resentful after discovering Julian wasn't my son and had fabricated the murder plot. But the judge quickly shut down such baseless accusations. The trial lasted for 3 days. During his final statement, Julian unexpectedly asked to speak. "I plead guilty," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wronged Eleanor Vance. She was the only person in my life who ever truly loved me. And he choked up, unable to continue. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that she can be happy in the future." Clara, however, maintained her innocence to the end, blaming Julian and Vince for everything. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before reaching a verdict. Julian was found guilty of attempted murder, but due to his actions in preventing the crime, he was sentenced to a lighter term of 8 years in prison. Clara was also found guilty and sentenced to 12 years. Vince, as an accomplice, received 5 years. When the judge read the sentence, Clara shrieked in protest and was forcibly removed from the courtroom by the bailiffs. Julian accepted his sentence calmly. He gave me one last look, mouthed the words "I'm sorry," and was led away. Stepping out of the courthouse, the sunlight was blinding. The media swarmed me, but I made no comment, getting straight into my car and driving away. Back in my empty, cavernous penthouse, I finally broke down. 35 years of love, regardless of blood, had been seared into my soul. The thrill of revenge was gone, replaced by an endless void of grief and loss. That night, I dreamed of 5-year-old Julian hugging my leg and asking, "Mommy, will you love me forever?" I knelt down, stroking his little face, until the stars stopped shining and the ocean stopped flowing. I woke up to a soaking wet pillow. Chapter 9. A New Path. In the month following the verdict, I barely left my house. Arthur visited daily, bringing company documents and updates on the case. "Julian has been transferred to a state prison upstate," he told me one day. "He's enrolled in psychological counseling and vocational training. His behavior is good." I nodded, offering no comment. Julian was paying for his choices. I no longer hated him, but I couldn't forgive him either. "There's something else." Arthur hesitated. "He wrote you a letter." I took the unsealed envelope but didn't open it immediately. "How's the company?" "Business as usual. The new VP is very capable. The quarterly reports are even better than expected." Arthur paused. "Eleanor, you need to think about starting a new life." "I know," I said, looking out the window. "Actually, I'm planning a trip." "A trip? Where to?" "Europe, Asia, everywhere." I smiled faintly. For 35 years, I never truly lived for myself. It's time. After Arthur left, I opened Julian's letter. The handwriting was neat, as if it had been rewritten many times. "Dear Mom, please allow me to call you that one last time. I know I've lost that right, but in my heart, you will always be my only mother." In the letter, he recalled moments from his childhood, expressed deep remorse for his betrayal, and confessed his confusion and anger after discovering his true parentage. "When I found out I wasn't your biological son, I felt like my whole world had collapsed. I foolishly thought that if our blood connection was a lie, then your love for me must have been a lie too. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. True family isn't about blood. It's about 35 years of love and nurturing." At the end, he wrote, "I don't ask for your forgiveness, only for your happiness. If there is a next life, I hope to truly be your son and spend my life repaying your love." My tears stained the letter. I carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer where a dozen other similar letters already lay. He had sent one every week since his incarceration. This was the first one I had opened. The next day, I visited Evelyn's grave. This woman I had never met, whose life had become entangled with mine because we loved the same man. I placed a bouquet of white roses on her headstone. "Your son made a mistake, but he is being punished for it," I said softly. "I will not pursue it any further." Returning from the cemetery, I began preparations for my trip. Passports, visas, itineraries, these mundane tasks provided a temporary distraction. I decided to go to Italy first, a place I had always wanted to visit but had always been too busy with work or family. A week before my departure, I visited Julian one last time. He was thinner, but his eyes were clearer than they had been at the trial. "Mrs. Vance," he quickly corrected himself. "Thank you for coming. I'm going on a trip tomorrow," I said directly. "I might be gone for a long time." He lowered his head. Please, take care of yourself." "I will," I said. I hesitated, then said the words. "You work on getting better in here." He looked up sharply, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I will. I promise I will." Leaving the prison, a light rain was falling. I didn't use an umbrella, letting the water wash over my face, as if cleansing away the shadows of the past. Chapter 10. Reunion in Venice. Under the Italian sun, I gradually found my inner peace. The ancient ruins of Rome, the art of Florence, the canals of Venice, every sight reminded me of the vastness of life. It turned out that, away from that environment of betrayal and pain, the world was still a beautiful place. In a small cafe in Venice, I met Massimo. He was an art history professor at the local university, in his early 60s, a widower, with a gentle smile and a wealth of knowledge. We met when we both reached for the last copy of a travel guide. "After you," he said with a gentlemanly gesture. "We could share it," I suggested. And just like that, we talked for the entire afternoon. Massimo was fascinated by Eastern culture, and I knew little about Italian art. We each discovered a new world in the other. For the next few days, he became my volunteer guide, taking me to see small chapels and museums off the beaten path. Under his guidance, the ancient frescoes and sculptures seemed to come to life. We talked about art, life, and our pasts, though I omitted the darkest parts of mine. "You have a certain sadness about you," he said one day, "like someone who has endured a great deal but remains strong." I didn't deny it. Life isn't easy for anyone. On the eve of my departure from Venice, Massimo invited me to dinner. In a small restaurant by the canal, he suddenly took my hand. "Eleanor, I know this is sudden, but may I come to America to see you?" His gaze was so sincere and ardent that it reminded me of the pure feelings of my youth. "I would like that very much," I heard myself say. Back in the States, I began to redesign my life. I entrusted the company to a reliable team and established a foundation against domestic abuse, specifically to help elderly parents who suffer abuse from their children. Julian's case became a cautionary tale, bringing much-needed attention to the issue. Massimo came to visit as promised. I showed him around New York, Washington, D.C., and my hometown. He was captivated by American culture, and I rediscovered the beauty of my own country. With him, I was no longer the iron-fisted tycoon or the wounded mother, but simply a woman who could enjoy life. 6 months later, I was back in Italy, this time for Massimo's daughter's wedding. Under the Venetian sunset, he proposed. "I know we're not young anymore," he said, holding my hand. "But that's precisely why we should cherish every day we have left." I didn't say yes immediately, but I didn't say no. I needed time, and Massimo understood. Returning to America, I made 2 decisions. First, I transferred the majority of my company shares to my foundation, retaining only a supervisory role. Second, I went to the prison to tell Julian about my new life. "You look different," Julian said through the glass, a genuine happiness in his eyes. "I am happy," I said frankly. "I hope you can find your own peace, too." "I'm trying," he said, showing me a manuscript he was working on titled The Path to Redemption, A Betrayer's Confession. A publisher had expressed interest. "I'll buy a copy," I smiled. Before I left, I finally said the words I had held back for so long. "Regardless of blood, you were once my son. That will never change." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank you, Mom. That was the last time I saw him." Afterward, I moved to Italy to start a new life with Massimo. We never officially married, but we lived in the same house, sharing every sunrise and sunset. Sometimes, I would think back on that dark period of betrayal and revenge. But now, those memories no longer brought pain, but rather a deeper appreciation for the happiness I now had. I often found myself staring at the sunset by the canals of Venice. Massimo would never interrupt, just sit quietly beside me. He knew that everyone has a past they must face, and my past, like the slowly setting sun, had finally gone down. And tomorrow would be a brand new day.